Hello and welcome to another weekly analysis behind the news. So here we are, barely into 2017, and what's the first thing that the Republican Congress tries to do? In the words of Senator Rand Paul, to pass a budget that never balances. This proposed budget resolution would tack on nearly $10 trillion worth of debt. Does this sound like fiscal responsibility to you? I don't recall that adding more debt was a Republican campaign promise. What this demonstrates is that we need to be even more vigilant than we ever have been before. Too many times we have seen Republicans come to power and, in the name of conservative reform, grow the federal government. And of course, anytime the federal government grows, American liberties suffer. Congressman Thomas Massie posted on Facebook that Senator Rand Paul exposes the fact that the Senate Obamacare repeal bill is actually a 10-year federal budget that adds $9.7 trillion to the debt. It's true that the only way to repeal Obamacare in the Senate with less than 60 votes is to add the repeal language to the budget, which requires only 51 votes, he writes. However, since Republicans get to write that budget, why would we write one that adds over $9 trillion to the debt? In answer to that question, he only needs to look to the House and Senate leadership. Freedom Index scores for Speaker of the House Paul Ryan is about 58%. Now, realize that as Speaker, Ryan does not vote unless there is a tie to be broken. So his Freedom Index score is based on his voting record from about 1999 to early in 2016. However, most of the rest of the Republican leadership in the House recently earned scores of a dismal 30% for their 2016 votes. And over in the Senate, Majority Leader Mitch McConnell earned about 40%, as did the majority of his leadership team. Folks, these numbers reflect how often these representatives and senators vote according to the Constitution. Shouldn't leadership be earned and based on how well you perform your constitutional duties, instead of how well you fulfill a political agenda? On a brighter note comes news that the bill to get us out of the United Nations has been reintroduced for the new session of Congress. Now write this down, folks. H.R. 193. H.R. 193 was introduced once again by Representative Mike Rogers, as well as a coalition of liberty-minded lawmakers. This is the same bill as H.R. 1205 of the previous session, just with a different filing number. According to the New American Magazine, if approved, the legislation would repeal the UN Participation Act of 1945, which authorized U.S. involvement, and shutter the U.S. government's mission to the outfit. It would also terminate all membership by the United States in the United Nations, and in any organ, specialized agency, commission, or other formally affiliated body of the United Nations. It would also end all U.S. involvement in all UN conventions and agreements. If this goes through, the U.S. will save itself about $10 billion a year and put a stop to the sovereignty bleeding that we have been subject to since 1945. With the current leanings of the Trump administration, the House and the Senate, as well as the constant revelations of the UN's anti-American agenda, the time is finally right to get us out of the United Nations. The JBS has been working very hard on this since 1959. We have documented the part that the UN plays in the larger scheme of world government. Only recently has the UN been so bold in its efforts that its agenda of global control has been understood by the average American, especially through its Agenda 21 and 2030 efforts to gain control of our daily lives through means of radical environmentalism. Once details of H.R. 193 are available online, we'll have an action alert that you can use to send to Congress to garner support for the bill. In the meantime, we recommend discussing this with other like-minded organizations to get their support. Also, we recommend writing letters to the editor, sharing the latest articles from the UN from the New American on social media, calling into the talk radio shows, holding showings of UN videos, plus placing Get Us Out billboards in your area, and passing out our UN books and literature to decision makers in your community. Visit shopjbs.org for these materials. Links are also included in the video description below. Now let's take a small step back into history. When JBS first began, JBS founder Robert Welch had a specific goal of operating a national speakers bureau to place Americanist speakers before thousands of audiences of all sizes. Within a few years, our speakers bureau was the largest in the world when measured by the number of engagements sponsored. In 1990 and 1991, we brought in a speaker by the name of Tecumseh Linda, who was from South Africa. He was one of a few black leaders in South Africa who had the courage to speak out against the African National Congress and Nelson Mandela and the Communist movement. He was former president of the South African Conference of Mayors and was the former mayor of the Black Township in Port Elizabeth. Because of his courageous stand, there were constant threats against him and his family. His business was looted and burned, along with his home, but he believed that capitulation to the communist terrorists would create a virtual hell on earth. The titles of his speeches were The Communist Subversion of South Africa and South Africa Betrayed. When Nelson Mandela was on his media tour in the U.S. in 1990, JBS members booked venues for Mr. Linda in the same cities as Mandela's, usually within a day or two after Mandela went through. To advertise for Mr. Linda's speech in New York City, members wanted to take out an ad in the New York Times. The newspaper reviewed the ad and then wanted documentation for Mr. Linda's claims about Mandela. They were provided this documentation in the form of photocopied articles from their own newspaper. At this point, we received a cease and desist letter to stop reproducing articles. The ad, of course, was never run. However, one ad that did run last week came in part from the Revolutionary Communist Party, otherwise known as RevCom. No doubt many of you have seen this despicable ad. It's filled full of hate, intolerance, historical inaccuracies, and false characterizations. It's signed by a number of self-proclaimed communists, including Bill Ayers, who, as you probably know, was an early mentor in the life of Obama. Ayers helped to shape the worldview of the future president and got him started in community organizing. The ad calls for a month of resistance to create a situation where the Trump administration is prevented from ruling. But wasn't it both Hillary Clinton and President Obama that mentioned a smooth transition from one administration to another shortly after the Democratic defeat in November? Where are they now? Do they support such activity? And why would these communists see fear in a Trump administration? Could it be that their agenda is now in serious freefall? In 1960, our experts rated the communist influence over the federal government at about 40% of total control. Since then, it has only progressed. But the communists are following their old tried and true game plan of creating a crisis to get government to react to it. And of course, that reaction usually results in more government and less freedom for the individual. Interesting to note that some of the fears they list in this ad can only occur with an overreaching and all-encompassing central government, of which they help build by causing these crises. Those that do show up to start trouble in D.C. during inauguration won't have to wait too long for the boot heel of the government to be felt on their neck, as the media has reported some 5,000 National Guard troops being called up, while another 3,000 security officers will be utilized in D.C. For those that thought communism was dead, we'll see it alive and well in the streets of D.C. next week. It's just one more instance of the John Birch Society being proven correct years after being ridiculed. This also shows that there has never been a better time to get involved. Join or donate to the John Birch Society today. Visit jbs.org for more information. And be sure to like and share this video with family and friends. Sign up for our e-newsletters and subscribe to our social media channels. Until next week, we'll see you then.